Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the link. We are delighted to have a full house tonight for the part 2 of our 12th annual Life Science Panorama. The virtual conference at noontime was a great success, and we are happy to welcome you for part 2. I'm Ludivine Wolczyk. I'm the Executive Director of the French-American Chamber of Commerce, New England, FACNI. We are a non-profit association supporting the launch and development of French tech company in the United States. We are part of a national network of 18 chapters, and we can help you with services. I would like to thank my team for their support for this event tonight. Maud, our events manager, Monique, our member engagement manager, and Zoe, who is interning with us. So this event has now been a long tradition of collaboration with the Life Science Forum of FACNI, the FABS, co-chaired by our board member, Laure Berliner and Gigi Chaffee. This event tonight is made possible thanks to the strong support of our 2 sponsors. I'd like to thank Business France, Healthcare, North America, specifically their representative, Jérôme Revol, who is here. Marie-Astrid Sevilla, who is an active member of our Life Science Forum. And Flavio Caratu, who is leading the great delegation of 13 French startups in Boston this week. Our second sponsor and longtime sponsor is Ipsen, our platinum member. And I'd like to invite Philippe Lopez Fernandez, Executive VP and Chief Business Officer, to come here for a few words. Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you, Ludivine. Indeed, we are very happy to support the FACNI and this session. Very happy to support especially this session because, frankly, we are active in this field as Ipsen, but we are also super excited about the potential of IA in pharma. It's really something that is burgeoning. There's a great panel today, but there's also a lot of people in the room that are working on things like that. And the potential in pharma is going to be huge. This is going to transform our industry, and this is just the beginning. So it's super exciting. And what is also on top of that is there's a lot of French companies that are engaged into this field, and the French excellence is really something that can be noticed here. So let's see that.
And now to introduce our keynote speaker, Gigi Chaffee.
Thank you, everyone, for joining this evening. I'm Gigi Chaffee, a PharmD and co-chair of the Life Science Forum alongside Laure Berliner, and wanted to actually acknowledge the team behind the scenes. So if everyone from the FABS team can stand up really quick. So we're all volunteers, actually, trying to support innovation and education across the community and across the pond.
Thank you, Ludivine. That was terrific. Talk about a hard act to follow. So we have 3 panelists on. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about the implications for your jobs, and then where this is going and how we think we can move from using it to improve efficiencies to top-line revenue. So this is, from an entrepreneur's perspective, this is focused for you. So if the panelists want to step up, we have 3 people. We have Benji Lin right here. So I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing him because we don't have that much time, but Benji is a partner over at McKinsey, and he focuses on data analytics, on the healthcare industry, and med tech. In the middle, we have Rebecca Schechter. So Rebecca is MIT grad and has done a lot of things, and she's going to give an example of how AI can be scaled for application in the healthcare industry. I think you'll find that hopefully inspirational. It'll get your gears turning. And then we have Saket Malhotra. So he is over at Ipsen, so one of our sponsors. Thank you for joining us. All three of them are really well versed on the AI implications, both how it's been used up to date, and then ways that this can help advance your programs, your companies, and hopefully your positions where you can keep your jobs. All right. All right. So with that, Benji, well, we'll start with you. Where are we? What's the state of play in AI at the moment in healthcare?
Sure, happy to. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? This is loud and clear. Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Happy to give just a quick primer of sort of what I'm seeing in the industry across life sciences and healthcare. I think really what we're seeing is convergence of use cases where there is a lot of value, data, workflow, and change management. So basically, you need to have the data in order to develop the algorithms. You need to have value so that you know that you're getting return on whatever you're investing, right? There's change management, so people are ready for this AI, right? Because that can be a huge challenge. And then finally is that there's a workflow that you're specifically targeting to change, right? So if you think about your businesses, those are really the areas where people are starting. And where that kind of ends up in biopharma in a lot of instances is in R&D, right? Where there's tremendous value, right? We just saw 15 years, right? A very, very long path to market. And then the second is commercial. We're seeing a lot of use cases in commercial because it's the end, right? It's the closest to value. It's one of the things that you can invest in and get a really quick return.
So maybe just to give a couple of examples so people have a concrete picture in their head of right now it's being used things like AlphaFold. It's being used for target identification, molecule optimization. So the chemistry, this is all very early stage stuff in the biopharmaceutical industry. But once you get into animals and in vivo and even some in vitro stuff, the AI applications drop precipitously. We're going to have Saket talk in a second about how that's being used in the clinic at scale. But let's move over to Rebecca and make sure that we're hearing from her.
Great.
Okay, you got that.
So bonsoir, an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm sitting here as a person that can talk to you about having been a practitioner that actually deployed Gen AI and AI at scale in healthcare delivery. I happen to have been the former CEO of Optum Behavioral Health, so I can't wait, by the way, for you to start deploying that. But I, since then, have led the Dragon Ambient Experience business. That is the ambient clinical documentation solution that was deployed by Nuance and purchased by Microsoft. When I joined, we had about 1,000 doctors using this.
I mean, maybe just tell them for
Yep.
a second what a Nuance was.
Yes, I'll explain. So we had 1,000 docs using this. In a period of 2 years, we had 10,000 doctors using this with 15 million patient-provider encounters, using this every single day to restore the joy of medicine. Nuance at its core is a voice recognition company. Most of you who are physicians learned to use Dragon. How many, any folks, are you familiar with the Dragon microphone where you dictate? Yes, into the EHR. What DAX is, Dragon Ambient Experience, is the next generation product that's ambient. And so what this does is, so let's say I'm at the doctor's, I would say, do you mind if we record this conversation, Benji? And Benji would say, yes. I put the phone down, and now for 20 minutes, I'm focused on Benji. And that entire conversation gets recorded. It gets transformed through AI/ML into a clinical SOAP note that is within milliseconds pre-populated into the EHR for me to review. It has massive positive impact on the doctors that don't have to remember every single thing that Benji told me. And oh, by the way, I would typically be typing this up at 10 o'clock at night after having seen 20 Benjis during the day. So my chances of remembering this properly. So the doctors are happy. The patients are happy because I'm actually looking at him and actually focus on what he's doing. And what it does is the doctors voluntarily add appointments to their calendar. So it increases capacity. It increases access in the system. And the last stat I will share with you is it lowers prior auth calls by 50%. What that means is the accuracy of the information actually increases the throughput and the payment So it actually hits the bottom line. So it is one of the very few technologies that really hits to the point of what you said. It's like we had the data to be able to train the model. It was a critical pain point that drove value, and we embedded it in workflow. So I actually think it's a really, really good example to think of that actually has scaled. And while I come from financial services, I actually think it's the first time in a very long time that healthcare is ahead of financial services.
So we just want to touch on that point for 1 second, because this integration of these new techniques, new technologies, new products into workflow. This is something I think everyone is going to experience. If it's not happening now, it's happening very soon, coming to a theater near you kind of thing. Workflow, AI is going to creep into everything you do. So how did you train the doctors? What was that process like, and how successful was it?
So in the spirit of full disclosure, when we initially started this, first of all, the docs were excited by the concept of, oh my God, I can actually focus on the patient. What we initially did is we trained them to record the conversation, and we actually had humans training the AI. So we had about 3,500 people in the US, in India, and the Philippines that listened to the conversation, made sure the AI was doing it accurately, and populated into the EHR for the doctors for them to review. That's how we built the data and the knowledge and the accuracy of the AI, so that an ortho was getting the kind of note he needed, or a family practice was a very, very different, as you can imagine, clinically, and the kinds of things that would happen during those conversations. We then coupled that with folks that sat elbow to elbow with the doctors and watched how they did this. And made sure that we embedded ourselves in their day-to-day workflow without disrupting it. Ultimately, it allowed us to move to a complete software as a service solutions. We could remove the human that was training the AI, and the doctor remained the sole human in the loop that ultimately
And you had a very willing participant. The
Very
doctors
willing
were very
participant.
enthusiastic. about
Very
it.
careful not to disrupt what the doctor was doing, which is, listen, I am talking to a patient, and I ultimately need to document this into the EHR, and I would love to be able to do it as I'm walking out of the room.
So this is an excellent example of efficiency gain. So in hospitals, hospital systems, from a money perspective, finance perspective, I'm sure the docs loved it. They can see more patients, they can bill more. All right. So there was a lot of efficiencies and improvements to the top line revenue, because they can bill more.
Right. And I know you'll have us talk about this a little bit, and then I'll pass the mic on to you. Is, you worry about what jobs are going away. If we have any medical scribes in the audience, your job is going away, right? But the fact that we are capacity constrained in clinical workforce, that absolutely we need to keep doctors practicing medicine, nurses practicing medicine, et cetera. Like, that is a key component, that what they're no longer going to be doing this note taking, they're actually going to be dispensing care.
And so as we were just talking before, we were talking from one of the earlier panelists from this morning, we were talking about an application. So anyone who has ever done a clinical trial, are you familiar with what's called the ECOG score? It's a score of how the patient, their health, their status, are they mobile? Can they feed themselves, dress themselves, bathe themselves? And then 0 means that they're perfectly functioning, and it goes up in score, but down in physical capacity from there. Very subjective. This is something where the technology we heard about earlier today, where what you're describing about how the patient is speaking, this is an application that does not exist. So for any scribes that are losing your jobs, maybe you think about doing that. There's a new business right there. But Saket, so you've got some interesting applications as well that Ipsen is applying.
It's slightly different from what Benji and Rebecca said. So we see AI usage in 2 different areas. The first one is the productivity efficiencies, where you can bring AI in the context of business value to support your commercial and field organizations. Everyone is using like chatbot, and it's becoming more and more critical when you are a global function, where you, instead of hiring individuals in all countries, you can use these technologies to convert into a standard way to engage and bring data and value together. But looking from the commercial standpoint, there are several use cases, very proven use cases, and Dina mentioned complex endpoint. And the way we are using AI is to look for those use cases, clearly define the business outcomes. And one of the use case we're executing here at Ipsen is finding the patients. So Ipsen is in 3 different therapeutic areas, and one of the TA is rare disease, where there's no clear endpoint. So how do you find these patients? By looking at the external data sources. And that is where AI can really help you to build these models, what Dina shared. And behind the, see, it's a model, AI-based model, a machine learning-based model.
So you're using data scraping, right? Isn't there some
Data
data scraping? So social media and
Social
yeah.
media, different third-party data sources, real-world data, your patient profile, outcome data. So you bring all of this together, apply some of these algorithms and models to understand who are your patients and how you're going to convert those leads into your actual patients by informing your field reps.
And Benji, this is what you were talking about. So we know that there's applications early, so the chemistry and that very drug discovery, but this is a middle, right? This is in the middle of that, the value chain of drug development. So that's what you were referring to, right? With the need, there's a real need there.
Yeah, I think it's a real need and it's very close to value. Every patient you find, immediate value, right? And that's really where I think the focus is. I think right now there's people who are thinking about what are the bets I want to make for 3, 5 years down the line. But a lot of times, especially in this environment, executives aren't necessarily patient, right? They don't want to wait. All right, I'm going to invest in this AI, and in 3 to 5 years, I'm going to see something. They want to see something next quarter, the quarter after. And those are the use cases that everyone's looking at.
And I would say whenever you're thinking of this, think from the problem standpoint. What problem you're trying to solve? AI is just a tool, which is the easy. It's very mature. It's there for 10, 15, 20 years. Now we are using more. But what are the use cases you want to solve? What is the problem? And how you can leverage AI, bringing your data, analytics, and insights, and also bring your digital technologies all together to bring the speed to insight. Because what AI can do is the speed. And then you have to train these models. So as you build these models from commercial, from medical and clinical standpoint, first time it's not going to be accurate. And Dina mentioned like 86, 90% accuracy, which is a very good accuracy. So as you're defining and automating these processes, looking at these commercial or medical use cases and automating that, bringing the speed and aligning that with the clear measures in the end are very important.
There are people who are going to use it as their business, their industry, their research, right? So they're very specific. But then there's the rest of us schlubs out there who it's just going to it's going to be foisted on us. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, now you have to use this new tool, right? Now what?
Actually, a great example of something that we made a mistake on, and to your point of learn quickly. So I mentioned we have this great tool. It fits into the doctor's workflow, right? The doctor is meeting the patient. We talk a lot. It documents, et cetera. And what is the next population in healthcare that is constrained? Nurses, right? So we said, well, why don't we just take this and give it to the nurses? And guess what? Didn't work at all, right? The nurse workflow is completely different. How many of you have worked with nurses and like they'll typically be taking notes in their palm, by the way, of your vitals. Then they're actually worrying about transitioning the shift. Then they're actually having a conversation. And so we had to rethink, to your point of focus on the problem, watch the problem, and then figure out what tool you put on it, because we tried to foist it on them. And right, you know what? But we very quickly figured out we had to turn around and do something different.
And it's the same with clinical trials too, right? Like not all clinical trials need the same thing. They don't necessarily have the same pain points, right? So an AI solution that is really effective for a rare disease clinical trial may not be the same solution that is effective for an oncology clinical trial. So just understanding these nuances is really important.
And I think the other use case is becoming very standard out there is the personalized experience for your customers. It can be your physicians, it can be your nurses, nurse practitioners, and your patients. So one area we are investing a lot on AI is to understand the customer and patient preferences, and how we can give that personalized experience. So when we are using our patient services or patient hub programs, and we are trying to enroll these patients on our drug treatment, how we can understand the personal profiles, understand who are the physicians in those areas, and give that experience through our caregivers and other support staff is becoming a standard practice. And same thing is happening on the physician side, where we all are humans. We are looking for very personalized experience. Like, we don't want these sales reps to visit us and tell us about the drugs. And we need very personalized experience based on the channels we use, how we want to be engaged through different manufacturers. And that is becoming very important, going all the way to measure the impact of each engagement, because finding time with physicians are so difficult. If you have 5 minutes with a doctor, you need to be very effective to communicate the right message at the right time. And that is where technologies like AI can really help you to give that.
Yeah, it's a really good, strong application. So the patient experience with the doctor. So you gave us a great example. Anyone who's been to the doctor now, they have electronic health records. Every time you go to see your doctor, they send you a link, and you have to fill out page after page after page of all of these things that you just filled out 3 months ago. So this seems like a great application for anyone who's looking for a new business. That's a great application for a way to simplify using these tools, using tools that are already out there. It's just a smart application of them that brings efficiency and revenue.
I think one thing we're all sort of dancing around, and I'll just say it explicitly, there's a lot of skeptics of AI out there. And so their expectation for what is good, what fits in my workflow is quite high, right? If you launch something, it doesn't fit into their workflow, right? You only get so many shots on goal. So you have to be very thoughtful, right? Because there are skeptics out there. You're going to have to convince them that you thought about them. And the other point we cannot stress enough is it's never just the AI, right? Again, AI is a simple tool. If you're looking to build a cabinet, it's like showing up with just a hammer, right? You need the whole plethora of digital tools to create that end-to-end experience that is tailored to that specific customer or that specific problem.
The only other thing I would add, and maybe you can translate this into the biotech pharma, a lot of the work that we did was partnering with the EHR vendors as we were integrating this tool. Because once again, we want it to be in the workflow. And so partnering with the likes of Epic so that the fields appeared in the 11 areas in Epic that the doctor had to review to sign off on the note was critical, right? That ability to
Keeping it familiar.
Keeping it absolutely familiar and working with them to say, okay, well, now that we have this note captured, what else can we do that actually helps the doctor? Might we be able to scan the note and realize, oh, there was a mention of a medication. Should we tee up the prescription? We could do that. Let's work with Epic to figure that out. By the way, as the doctor is rereading the note, he or she wants to, I need to change all the pronouns. How might we be able to overlay technology and solutions to allow them to do that instantaneously? And so thinking through, how is the user using this? How does it fit into their workflow? And who are the partners in your ecosystem that you need to work with to actually make that come to life?
Yeah, Rebecca, you mentioned that finance. This is one time that healthcare is ahead of finance. I think finance is catching up very quickly. I was at a meeting with some folks from Goldman Sachs, and they said when somebody calls them, your phone number comes up, and they have systems in place that in milliseconds have mined everything about you. They know your address, your job, your approximate income, your spousal status, how many kids you have. Do you have a dog or a cat? They know all of this information in seconds, comes right up. They pick up the phone, and it's right in front of them, and they start talking to you like they know you. We should be able to apply that to our doctors. And hopefully they're not going to give us, drug interaction things, right? So, they know what we're on. Right?
I feel like the pharma analogy systems that are really important to keep in mind, right? Like if you're a sales rep and your tool does not integrate with your Salesforce instance, like lots of times sales reps are like, absolutely not. I'm not opening up a new browser to like document this interaction that I had. For research scientists, it might be your electronic lab notebook, right? Like all your historical data is out there. You want a formulation prediction, but guess what? It's trapped in like 5 different, siloed lab notebook sources, right? So I think these are the sorts of systems. I think actually healthcare is ahead of biopharma in that space because they've really centralized everything around the EHR, versus if you look at pharma R&D, data is all over the place.
Electronic health records, if anyone wonders what EHR is.
And one other area I think you all should be thinking is you can use these tools for innovation. So in pharma life sciences, many companies exploring of sales rep of the future, and everything is AI driven. So rather than hiring another rep, how you can have a virtual rep, because finding time with these doctors, physicians, nurse practitioners are very difficult. And if you look from the medical standpoint, they are like something called digital opinion leaders. So there's a shift in the industry moving from more key opinion leaders to digital opinion leaders. And they all are digitally savvy. And that is where a lot of companies are now targeting these customers using virtual reps, which is like a human. You're bringing a lot of data, the intelligence by leveraging AI, machine learning. Many companies are now exploring Gen AI, generative AI, and you mentioned that to automate the processes, bring a very different experience. And one of the case study we executed at Ipsen is bringing, like, whenever you enroll, you can enroll through pharmacies or through your patient services. And when you're going through the pharmacy, how do we bring that data and inform the pharma manufacturers? And we used to get like faxes and emails and SMS to get that information. And we use generative AI to automate end-to-end process. And we are processing that, bringing it together, informing our caregivers in our health system, and they just review, verify, approve, and you know the patient dynamics. And you can use that feedback loop to train your internal customers to have very personalized experience. So there are several use cases, not to replace the jobs, but to empower you to bring the speed, be more outcome focused, more value focused as part of the change, and work with your compliance, legal team members, because life sciences are highly regulated. So bring them upfront in the process.
So again, so there's the theme, if you're catching on, is there's efficiencies, but if once you have the data and you understand the need, and you have the tools, and you have the way of mining that data, you can create new value. And we think right now, up until now, it's largely been efficiency gains, which is why people are losing their jobs. But we think that the future is going to be top line, these new companies, new applications, new ways of using these things, that with a little imagination, you'll have new jobs. It'll be a different job. And Benji, that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think all technologies sort of have this adoption curve, right? The first is, how do I use this technology within my current workflow, right? Because it's something I'm familiar with, and I understand how to do my current thing faster, right? So in Rebecca's example, it would be the physician, previously would dictate out loud to a dictaphone. It would go to a manual scribe in the background, which we would scribe it, and they changed from that to the voice to text, being able to auto scribe, right? That's the exact same workflow. You just replaced something in the workflow with something more efficient. The kind of next horizon is always, what is the new workflow and what are new things that are enabled? Now we have a better handle on this technology. So now it's this totally different way that the doctor and patient communicates, right? And so I think for AI, we're still in the early days of re-envisioning, what does that new way of doing things? What does that new sales process look like when people have really embedded like these tools in the way they think about, designing how they want to do a particular job?
And Rebecca, you talked about that. Yeah, you said you were giving the example of people are already dabbling with it.
Which one?
Which have large language models, for example.
Yes,
so that's
they are.
something people are
So
starting to.
a good example would be, okay, now, by the way, I mentioned we can tee up prescriptions, but what if I could actually automatically generate a patient summary? What if the patient is 5 years old? What if English is not their first language? I can do this immediately, right? Very different than it was. There's one other point I'd like to make that has been pretty jaw-dropping, and I say certainly personally. If you think this is going to take a long time, I would rethink again. When I joined Nuance, this was 2.5 years ago, we were the only game in town, and we thought we had a strategic moat. We had the data, we had the doctors, we had been working on this. We were Dragon. Dragon, every doctor in the system uses Dragon. It took us 10 years to get Dragon to the level of performance that it was today. Does anyone want to take a guess? 2 years out, how many competitors there are in the ambient clinical documentation space that are basically equivalent to the core of what DAX does? 2 years. Does anyone want to take a guess? We were the only game in town 2.5 years ago. Nope. We're between 80 and 100, depending
Give
on how
them
you look at it.
enterprise.
I mean, that literally, like, and they all are popped out of the woodwork, literally, in the last 9 months. So so just to give you a sense for how fast you need to get things to market, while I mentioned it took 10 years to get Dragon to where it was, we had to get from this human still training the AI to a full SaaS product. We did that in 3 months, guys. 3 months. Right? That's the speed at which you need to move, because if you're not thinking about it, someone else is.
And this space is moving very fast. Competition is growing. So you really need to be ahead in the game to leverage these tools to support your business outcomes and deliver the value.
Maybe we should make an AI tool that tells us what jobs we should be doing to keep ahead of the AI tools, right?
Yeah, I think one takeaway that I've sort of had across industries is just be very careful if you are building your strategic moat around the algorithm, right? Like that's the part that evolves incredibly quickly, right? If your strategic moat is around data or the user interface, like the stickiness of that human interaction is still there. So, when you think about your product, right, and there's different elements of the product, where are you creating unique value? If it's just the algorithm, you have to be very, very, very careful.
It might even be the application of the knowledge that you're extracting.
Correct.
So the knowledge is there, you're extracting it with your algorithm, but what are you doing with it? And how is that novel? How is that innovative? How are you generating new value?
And be prepared for that moat to shift, to your point. Like we thought we were the only game in town. And suddenly, these equivalents, so it turns out our data ended up being a moat. The integration into workflow ended up being a moat. The speed to execution ended up being a moat. And so really thinking that through, I think is a great point.
And I think it's a new era, new ways of working, very easy to use. You don't need to be technologists to use AI. There are tools out there where you can be business savvy and leverage these. There's so many self-service tools. So don't be scared that it's another technology. It's evolving, and be part of the journey. It will be a journey as you're building these models, to what Benji and Rebecca said. And you're not going to be right the first go. You have to train these models to get the outcome. And if you reach like 90, 95% accuracy, it's a very good accuracy. And then have a human to validate and approve the results, because some of these are going to like FDAs and your earning calls. So you need to be very accurate from clinical side, from medical and commercial side. And there are processes and proven methods out there.
So, Benji, so McKinsey, so you've seen lots of examples of different businesses. How are companies bringing this on board, and what are they doing from an enterprise perspective to train their employees to use these new tools? How is that rolling out right now?
That's a great question. There are a lot of different strategies, and it is unclear, to me at least, which one is the ideal strategy, right? I think it depends a lot on your workforce. So I'll kind of go through some different factors that I'm seeing, and would love to also invite Rebecca and Saket to also comment. But different things that I've seen people really consider when deciding which strategy to roll out. The first is, what are the AI use cases that ultimately drive value? If you don't have a sense of this, you will likely have a field of 1,000 poppies situation where you're not really doing anything and everybody knows this new technology is here and everyone's trying to like do it in little silos, right? So you need to have a little bit of top-down strategic mandate on like, this is where value is. Otherwise, it's doesn't seem to scale well, right? So that's the first is there a strategic mandate? The second is like, what is sort of like the nature of your workforce, right? I think I think not enough people think about where's my workforce starting, right? A lot of people think about, okay, this is what drives value, and this is my data readiness, this is my analytics readiness. I think a little bit more time should be spent thinking about the actual people. Are they kind of people that are excited about digital tools? Are they people who are very skeptical of digital tools? Because ultimately, it's the change management hurdle that's almost always the hardest, right? Like the most costly is almost always data integration. People like forget, oh, I forgot my data was like in all these different silos. But the difficult thing that everyone sort of fails is really change management. So having in mind, where are your people starting, right? Are they skeptical, or are they data forward? So I think, based off of those, you basically then have a placing your bets on, high value use cases that drive a lot of near term value, right? Showing that they're effective lighthouses, and then figuring out how to scale and radiate from there. That's generally the sort of philosophy and approach that I've seen work.
So
most
that
effectively.
sort of plays out for these enterprises where they bring in an outside, either consultant or maybe somebody internal to the enterprise has this knowledge, and they set up a plan with management, and then they implement it across the employees.
Yeah, I would say that that's generally true. I think what's really important is that ideally you have a sense of where value creation is occurring in the business. You can use an outside consultant to help you define that value, but really I feel very strongly that the business owner needs to have conviction in the value that is created, right?
And I think that's very true. The approach we took, we formed the AI COE as part of my function because we are business facing. Before we talk about AI or any other technology, we work closely with business partners to understand the problems. What are we trying to do, and what methods we can use to address the problems? And then we closely work with our global technology business partners to
Do you have somebody in-house that you work with, or you
Yes.
have an outside partner
So
that
we
you
have
bring in?
in-house. So on the business side, we have commercial and medical AI COE. They understand the business really well. They understand the data really well. They understand these methods really well to decide which techniques to use. Because within AI, there are different methods, which techniques to use to address those business problems. But when it comes to productivity, that falls under our global IT in-house, where we have experience on leveraging Copilot and virtual assistant. So they are building more productive focus, and we are more focused on business value, looking at different business use cases and how we can build that. So we interviewed, and slowly we build the COE around AI.
That's certainly one of the issues. Is there's a table set with all of these tools, and people like, I have no idea what these tools are, and I have no idea how I can use them.
And not to be the wet blanket, there's one other factor, all of which I agree with my fellow panelists, but there's one other major consideration as this gets deployed across enterprises, and that is the ability to be compliant, understand risk, and have the appropriate governance. I also happen to sit on a public company board, and we spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about what is the governance, how are we going to monitor what people do with these tools. Like, in particular, having spoken to many hospital executives here in the Boston area, initially as these Gen AI tools were coming out, the worry was, are the docs and the systems going to take your personal health information and put it onto ChatGPT to try to get a diagnosis and see what it sounds like, right? Like teaching people like, no, that is, you should not be doing that. And that's super important, in addition to everything you said, to make sure you're very clear how you're going to govern and manage the risk around these tools, because one, they're not all equal. Two, they do hallucinate, right? And so how are you going to manage that? How are you going to monitor that? I do think is also a very important consideration.
So anyone in the regulatory space here, here is your future. What Rebecca just outlined your future for you. So I'm going to go back to this analogy of you come to this buffet, and there's all these delicious tools sitting on the table, and you don't know how to use them. How Are there people, are there companies out there that you can hire and bring in to help you understand, look at your enterprise, help you figure out a way to apply these in ways that will improve your productivity, maybe give you some new top line? So if you're a drug developer, you're a chemist, you don't know anything about AI tools. If you run clinical studies, so you're a clinical manager, like you're a clinical trial assistant, or you don't know what these tools are. You know your job, but there are these tools. How do I bring these tools in? How do I pull them into my workflow?
So initially, we invested in external partner to come in, bring some of the best practices, build that knowledge within the company. And as part of that, we invested in trainings and webinars and how to bring that awareness, educate internal talent to understand these technologies. The other thing what we did, that these technologies are changing very fast. If you look at like Gen AI, every 2 weeks there's a new version, and you don't want to be caught in that change management. So standardize your um, technology landscape so that your focus is on the value and not thinking like, oh, is there's a new technology with some new feature and you're revisiting. So there are some proven technologies out there. Just make sure that you internally work with standardizing a lot of those investments and then focus on driving the value.
Rebecca, do you want to say anything on that, or Benji? And then we'll have questions right after that.
Yeah, I have just one quick comment. I think one of the benefits of doing an internal build lots of times is you get to, build the data layer to be internally consistent, and then the user interface layer to be internally consistent. And then you just swap out the models as they evolve. So that's a really common approach that works really well, where you really, to the point of you don't want your employees to be swapping out AI interfaces every 2 months, right? And you also don't want to be reorganizing your data every 2 months, right? So when you do an internal build, you can sort of standardize those more effectively, and you just need to build the right piping so that you can swap out, what is the best model at this point in time, but have the flexibility that if something changes in like the next 6 months, you can swap out to like the next model.
Yeah, maybe just to wrap up, and not because I worked for Microsoft. The way I always think about it is you actually think of it as a layered cake. You actually want the compute power. This could be AWS, could be Azure. I prefer it to be Azure, but like you do whatever you want. The next layer, to your point, is that data integration layer and having a consistent set of infrastructure. The next layer would be, what are the AI tools, components, and models you want to deploy on said data using said compute? And then what are the end applications that you're going to uniquely build or want? And being really clear on what infrastructure you have to be able to do this in a scalable, consistent, secure way is a critical decision.
On va prendre des questions, questions.
I'll fire off the first one. Great panel, thank you. A couple weeks ago, Dario Amodei, the founder of Anthropic, ex OpenAI, wrote a very powerful essay where the majority of it is about life sciences. And he talks about a compressed 21st century where we may see 50 to 100 years of development really impacting biology and healthcare and life sciences in 5 to 10 years because of some of what you've said. The efficiency gain, the fact that it's tool sets. And so what's your take on it? Will we have wonderful transformations within the next 10 years and not 100?
So I think we already see that change coming in the industry, in life sciences, on R&D side, clinical side, medical, commercial side. It's already happening. It's happening very fast. And in the markets we operate, like Ipsen, it's very competitive landscape. And you really need to be innovative. You really need to bring the speed to compete in these markets. So 5 to 10 years will be way ahead, but it's already happening as we speak. And all the biotech companies are investing, doubling down on AI, Gen AI, some of these innovative technologies. to bring the speed, but solve some complex problems which used to be very difficult, because using AI, you can run simulations so fast. So you can see results in hours rather than in months. And so it's already happening. So I think I read that article, and I think um, I fully agree that in 5 to 10 years, we will be there, and we may be ahead of what he's claiming.
Yeah, I would add the reflection that, the Google attention paper was in 2017, right? That's the core technology that underpins this. So it's been out there for 7 years already, right? So when you think about generative AI being here, right, it's not like it started with ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT, like the way I think about it is ChatGPT made it accessible to all these people. And now all these people knowing that there's technology out there and exploring with it is what's really driving, right, a lot of that discovery. Now, I think whether or not we'll see a lot of these like explosive discoveries, I think there's a few barriers still. I think we're working very hard as a community, like as a scientific community, right? I think there's a lot of consolidation of data that still needs to happen across different areas. I do a lot of chemistry because that's my background before joining McKinsey. And right now, like all this molecular data is still all in very fragmented data sets, right? I think once we figure out as a community what are the key data sets that we want to create, right, that will unlock these like key use cases, I think it will go incredibly fast. So that's my take.
I think there are just two hinders on that: lawyers and the regulators. They will slow that down.
But that's looking, you were talking about it, Benji, about looking at it from first the adoption and gain in efficiency so that you can stay within the workflow that you're using. And AI is a tool set. It is not just Gen AI. Yeah. And then the second stage is how do you change workflows? Because drug development does not have to be non-clinical and then phase 1 through 3 and 4. Totally. It doesn't have to be that way.
Totally.
We can think about it differently. Yep. Totally. We have a drug in 9 months. Yep.
I think drug repurposing is a huge example. Like in indication finding is a use case, right, that has come out that totally changes how you think about discovering and developing drugs, that greatly accelerates because it's drugs that already have a plethora of historical data on market.
Thank you for your panel discussion. I was just wanting to, and this is more probably for you, Rebecca, because as a clinician and just thinking about responsible AI use cases and the patient choice, could you comment based on your experiences on like scenarios, maybe when you implemented in the past, what happens when you ask a Benji, would you want that? And in that scenario, they say, oh, actually, no, not for this conversation, maybe the next one. Like, how does that happen organically for the clinician? And that impacts clinical trials too. So what are your thoughts there?
So I'll answer the question, but I'll zoom out first, which is why when I talked about the layers of the cake, you want to make sure you are partnered with a technology firm that is supporting you, that takes this very, very seriously. In addition, I'll get back to your question on the patient, but you want them to be treating that data, that information as carefully as you would, and that they are taking responsible AI very, very carefully. I'll give you an example. When we deployed DAX, we did a whole bunch of testing on it to make sure it doesn't discriminate women's voices, men's voices, older voices, accented voices. Like we did a massive amount of testing on this because from an ethical perspective, the idea was not to make the voice a hindrance. We were trying to have the voice to text. That was the idea to get it there. And so making sure that whoever you're working with, whoever your partner is taking that extremely seriously. I just want to make sure that that's clear. In terms of the patient consent, listen, if the patient says no, guess what? You go back to the way you used to do it. You type it up after the conversation. Interestingly, we had very, 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 very few patients that said no. in very sensitive conversations, behavioral conversations, oncology, like these are sensitive conversations. The reality is the privileged relationship that patients have with their clinicians is one of the most precious, and they probably say things that they wouldn't tell their spouse. And so the level of trust that is built there, given that the doc knew that he was partnering with a company that took that data and that segregation of data very, very carefully, it actually, frankly, was never a real issue. I mean, there were a handful, but it was completely de minimis.
We're going to take one more question. We have to keep it short because we're getting the hook.
But in real life, there's a problem and people don't know whether they need AI or not. Let's say I'm filing for IND for a drug development. I even don't know whether or how AI can help me in clinical trials. I'm a faculty at, let's say, MIT. I have 7, 10 postdocs. I even don't know whether or how AI can help me. So,
Tool awareness. This is what we write. So you don't know what tools are out there. Nobody does. This is so anyone out there who understands this stuff, that's a business, right? That you can do a startup, you can teach people, go into small companies, big companies, share people, here are the tools, here how they apply. If you're interested, we can come in, consult, educate your team, bring them on, and then you're off and running. That's one application.
Or use ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah. Dear ChatGPT, how do I do this?
I think one reflection that's really important to consider is our healthcare system is incredibly complicated, and value flows in oftentimes very odd ways. And it's really important to understand who is getting the value from the improvement of a particular workflow, because it may not be the user of that workflow. So the user and the customer in our healthcare system is particularly complicated. So just making sure you have clear articulation of those two places is really important.
I'd like to thank the panelists very much for the time, for the prep. So Ludovine, thank you. Yo, Gigi, thank you for putting this whole thing together.